At the reception desk of the prestigious Crown Regent Hotel, tension crackled like static. A wealthy Japanese businesswoman stood silently, her eyes sharp with disappointment, while 3 professional translators failed to understand her. The hotel manager, Rebecca Wallace, grew more agitated by the minute, publicly blaming the guest for the chaos. "She's turning this place into a circus," she snapped, unaware she was on the verge of igniting a scandal. In the background, Danielle Brooks, a black cleaning lady in her 32nd, quietly mopped the Prosen Z marble floor. For 6 years, she'd been invisible to the elite guests, until today. As she listened, something inside her shifted. She had seen this kind of arrogance before. But what no one at that front desk knew was that Danielle spoke fluent Japanese, a skill she had kept, hidden to survive in a world that often judged her by her uniform. With calm dignity, Danielle approached the confused guest and greeted her in perfect Kyoto-accented Japanese. The room fell into stunned silence. In a matter of seconds, she had resolved what 3 professionals couldn't in an hour. What followed was nothing short of a revolution, one that would flip the hotel's power dynamic, destroy a career built on prejudice, and launch Danielle into a future no one had imagined for her. Sometimes, the most overlooked person in the room is the one who holds the power to change everything. Everyone at the Grand Alcott Hotel thought they knew who held the power. It was Rebecca Wallace, the poised and demanding hotel manager who ruled the lobby like a stage, barking orders, silencing complaints, and carrying herself with the self-importance of someone who believed politeness was optional. But on that particular morning, the balance of power shifted silently, unexpectedly, and permanently. It started with a misunderstanding. A high-profile Japanese tech executive named Akiko Nakamura arrived to check in to the presidential suite. But none of the hotel's translators could understand her. She wasn't speaking Mandarin, nor Korean or Thai. Frustrated, they blamed her. Rebecca, flustered by the growing tension in the lobby, began berating Akiko, loudly and publicly, calling her an inconvenience and suggesting she shouldn't stay in an American hotel if she didn't speak English. The scene grew uglier by the minute, turning into a cultural and professional embarrassment. Watching from a corner was Danielle Brooks, a 32-year-old black woman in a cleaning uniform, quietly scrubbing the marble floors. She'd worked there for 6 years, unseen, unacknowledged, and underestimated. But today, her silence wasn't born of fear. It was strategy. Because Danielle understood exactly what was going on. She saw the racism in Rebecca's eyes, the condescension in her voice, and the mounting humiliation Akiko was being forced to endure. What no one at that front desk realized was that Danielle spoke fluent Japanese. Years ago, she'd volunteered at an immigrant center, helping Asian families adjust to life in the U.S. She learned their language, their customs, their struggles. But when she hit financial hardship, she took the only job she could get, cleaning floors at the Grand Alcott, and kept her skills hidden. There, she became a ghost with 5 languages, a college degree, and the quiet resolve of someone biding their time. But that morning, something inside Danielle snapped. She gently placed her mop aside, stood tall, and walked toward the group, ignoring Rebecca's furious glare. She turned to Akiko and said, in perfect Kyoto-accented Japanese, "I'm sorry. You were treated this way. May I help you with your reservation?" The lobby froze. Akiko's face changed instantly from guarded frustration to genuine surprise and then relief. She responded gratefully, and the 2 women began a calm, respectful conversation. In minutes, Danielle resolved what had taken translators and managers an hour to mishandle. The tech executive was checked in, her suite prepared, her assistant informed. Rebecca tried to regain control, barking, "You're just a cleaner. You're not authorized to speak to guests." But the damage had been done. Akiko had seen everything, and she had recorded everything. What Rebecca didn't know was that Akiko Nakamura wasn't just a tech executive. She was the CEO of Nakamura Global, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with hotel contracts worth tens of millions. And she had spent the last 2 hours silently enduring insult after insult, while recording them all, every xenophobic word, every dismissive gesture. When she finally spoke in fluent English, her voice was clear, cold, and deliberate. "The only person causing a scene here is you," she said to Rebecca. "And I now have proof of how your staff treats guests who don't look or speak like you." What followed was swift. Akiko contacted the hotel's corporate leadership and released the footage to her legal and PR teams. Within hours, Rebecca Wallace was suspended. Within days, she was fired and blacklisted from the hospitality industry. But the story didn't end there. Impressed not just by Danielle's language skills, but by her empathy, professionalism, and courage, Akiko offered her a new position, Director of Cultural Relations for Nakamura Global's U.S. operations, with a 6-figure salary, full benefits, and a team to manage. Danielle accepted the offer, not out of vengeance, but to finally step into the light she had been denied for so long. 6 months later, Danielle sat behind a sleek desk in her New York office, overseeing diversity and inclusion programs across international branches. Her former colleague, Marcus, who had quietly supported her from the hotel, was now her chief of staff. And together, they found and uplifted other overlooked talents. People like the Latina waitress Danielle had once mentored, now a multilingual intern in their department. The Grand Alcott Hotel, once a symbol of elitism and bias, had undergone a complete transformation. New management implemented strict training on cultural sensitivity, merit-based promotions, and regular audits on guest relations. Akiko Nakamura even invested in the .com hotel, ensuring its reform wasn't just symbolic, but structural. As for Rebecca Wallace, she now worked retail, her name permanently tied to a viral scandal that made headlines across industries. She had become a cautionary tale. How arrogance and prejudice, when unchecked, can implode a career in a single afternoon. And Danielle? She became a symbol of quiet strength and hidden brilliance, a reminder that dignity doesn't need a title. And real power often begins the moment someone decides they won't be invisible anymore. They thought she was just the cleaning lady, a silent figure who pushed her mop across the air. Marble floors of the Grand Alcott Hotel with practiced grace, never raising her voice, never interrupting. But what no one realized was that Danielle Brooks had spent years watching, observing, learning. And on one unforgettable morning, she would shatter every expectation placed upon her. That morning, a wealthy Japanese executive named Akiko Nakamura arrived at the front desk. Her company, Nakamura Global, was finalizing major U.S. partnerships, and her visit to the Grand Alcott was a diplomatic formality. But as soon as she opened her mouth to speak, the trouble began. None of the hotel's 3 translators could understand her. She wasn't speaking Mandarin, nor Korean, nor Thai. The staff grew agitated. The front desk faltered, and hotel manager Rebecca Wallace spiraled into panic. "She's been standing here for over 40 minutes. Rebecca snapped to her team, gesturing toward Akiko with an air of disdain. "If she can't speak English, she shouldn't be here." Guests nearby began to stare. Akiko remained composed, but her narrowed eyes betrayed rising frustration. Her assistant whispered urgently into her phone, canceling important meetings as tensions escalated. The translators looked defeated. And through it all, Danielle Brere continued mopping quietly until her hands tightened around the mop's handle. She'd seen this before. The humiliation, the arrogance, the assumption that status equaled intelligence and that uniforms erased identity. But today was different. Danielle gently placed her mop aside and stepped forward. Her voice was soft but confident. "Excuse me," she said to Akiko in fluent, Kyoto-accented Japanese. I'm so sorry for the confusion. May I assist you with your reservation? The lobby fell into stunned silence. Akiko's eyes widened. Her posture softened. And then she responded, relieved, grateful. The two women spoke calmly for several minutes. Danielle helped confirm the reservation, arranged for her suite, and assured Akiko that her team would be taken care of. Rebecca was livid. You're out of line. You're a cleaner. You don't speak to VIPs. But the tables had already turned. Akiko turned to Rebecca and spoke in flawless English. You. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. For 2 hours, Akiko had listened in. Silence, allowing the insults, the disdain, the xenophobia to build up. But now she revealed her hand. She wasn't just a guest. She was the CEO of Nakamura Global, overseeing international operations worth billions. She had recorded everything. Every disrespectful word from Rebecca. Every dismissive gesture. The fallout was immediate. Rebecca was placed on leave, and days later, she was publicly terminated. Her behavior had cost the hotel more than its dignity. It had jeopardized major corporate partnerships. But amidst the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Akiko offered Danielle a job. I've reviewed your background, she said. You have a degree in linguistics, 5 fluent languages, and volunteer experience with cultural integration. You're exactly the kind of leader we need. Danielle was stunned. For years, she'd hidden her qualifications out of survival, believing no one would give her a chance. But Akiko saw her not as a cleaner, but as a professional. She accepted the position as Director of Cultural Partnerships for Nakamura Global US, with a 6-figure salary and full benefits. 6 months later, Danielle stood in a sunlit executive office overlooking the skyline. She had launched mentorship programs for underrepresented workers, developed training for hotel staff across the country, and personally mentored a young Latina intern she discovered working in a hotel cafe, another overlooked gem. The Grand Alcott Hotel, once resistant to change, had restructured completely. Under pressure from Akiko and public scrutiny, they implemented mandatory diversity and inclusion training, rewrote their promotion policies, and began honoring talent over titles. As for Rebecca Wallace, she became a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked privilege. Blacklisted from the hospitality industry, she struggled to find work, her name tied forever to a viral scandal. And Danielle, she became a national voice. Her story was featured in documentaries, news segments, and leadership conferences, not as a revenge tale, but as a celebration of resilience. She had proven that the most powerful change can begin from the most unexpected places, that silence doesn't mean submission, and that sometimes the woman holding the mop knows more than the one holding the clipboard. Because in the end, true leadership isn't about your position. It's about how you treat people, especially when you think no one's watching. At exactly 9:02 a.m., a child's simple gesture nearly unraveled years of silence and distance. Inside the luxurious Whitestone lounge, Lucas Reynolds, a 10-year-old boy in a wheelchair, gazed up at a woman who had just served his table. She was black, graceful, and moved with the quiet poise of someone used to being overlooked. Her name tag read, Diana Johnson. Lucas looked past her uniform, past the glances of the waitstaff, and asked with genuine curiosity, Miss, do you dance? At first, Diana thought he was joking. She glanced toward the polished marble floor, the wealthy patrons, the stiff air of formality. But Lucas's eyes, gentle, hopeful, were sincere. I used to, she said, her voice warm. Why do you ask? Because I dream of dancing, but people say I can't, he replied, motioning to his paralyzed legs. The table fell silent, and from the far end of the dining room, Richard Reynolds, a powerful billionaire and Lucas's father, watched with icy detachment. He had brought Lucas here for brunch, not to play, not to dream. This was part of his structured weekend schedule, designed for order, not emotion. But something in Diana's gaze shifted. She knelt beside Lucas and whispered something only he heard. He beamed, and with gentle confidence, she placed his hands in hers and began to sway, just slightly, just enough for his body to follow. It wasn't a traditional dance, it was a statement, a step. Gasps fluttered across the room. The matra rushed forward, whispering in panic. "She's not allowed. This is highly inappropriate." But Richard raised his hand. For once, he didn't stop it. He couldn't, because something inside him cracked open as he watched. It was the first time in years he had seen his son smile with freedom. Not with permission, not with therapy goals, but joy. Lucas's mother, Richard's late wife, had once said, "The body may bend, but the spirit dances." And here, in the middle of a restaurant built on etiquette and separation, a forgotten waitress had brought that truth back to life. Afterward, Richard requested to see Diana privately. He wanted to offer her a position-high salary, personal assistant to Lucas, full access to his estate. She smiled politely and said no. "I'm honored," she replied. "But Lucas doesn't need more control. He needs freedom. That's what we just gave him." Then she handed him a flyer. Freedom Steps, a community dance program for children with disabilities. I co-founded this. We run classes in church basements, parks, wherever we're allowed. Richard was stunned. The same woman serving him orange juice ran a program that had more heart than any clinic he'd funded. The next weekend, he visited the program with Lucas. It was nothing fancy, scuffed floors, folding chairs, laughter echoing against chipped walls, but it was alive. Lucas joined the Praptidare group shyly. Diana didn't lead him. She let him explore. Other children danced too, each moving in their own way. But what struck Richard most wasn't the dancing. It was the research papers tacked to the bulletin board. Studies on neuromuscular rhythms and emotional autonomy. Co-authored by D. Johnson. He recognized the name. Months earlier, his foundation had rejected a grant from a Diana Johnson. Too grassroots, his board had said. Now he realized they had dismissed her brilliance without even knowing who she was. After the class, he asked her again, "Why not accept my offer? I could give you everything." "You already did," she replied gently. "You let your son lead." That night, Richard didn't sleep. He reviewed every document, every board decision, every moment he had been too proud to see. The next week, he returned to Freedom Steps, not as a billionaire, but as a father. He walked into their annual fundraiser and took the microphone. "My name is Richard Reynolds," he said. "I've built empires, but my son taught me how to build something far greater." He pledged full funding for Freedom Steps, with one condition. No strings, no control, just freedom. The center expanded. Lucas thrived. Diana became a national voice for adaptive arts, education. And Richard? He finally stepped back. Not in defeat, but in growth. He attended classes, Saturday on the floor, watched his son guide others, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to lead, only to follow. Months later, a journalist asked Diana what had changed Richard Reynolds' life. She smiled and said, "Not me. It was the boy who asked to dance. I just said yes. It was supposed to be a joke, a light-hearted sparring session to entertain the students after class." That's how Derek Mitchell, a cocky black belt instructor at Iron Fist Dojo, presented it. Just for fun, he grinned, gesturing toward the man mopping the gym floor. "Hey, James, why don't you come up here and show us your moves?" James Walker, the janitor, looked up slowly. He was quiet, tall, and built like a former athlete, but always kept to himself. He never interrupted, never showed off. Most assumed he was just an older guy down on his luck, probably working nights to make ends meet. But today, something shifted in the room. "Only if," James said calmly, "you agree to apologize. If you lose." Laughter erupted. Derek rolled his eyes. "You're on," he said, pulling on his gloves, clearly expecting a quick humiliation of the janitor in front of the students. Among the onlookers was Sarah Chun, a graduate student studying sports psychology and a rising jiu-jitsu trainee. She had always sensed something different about James. His eyes, the way he moved, like he was always observing, calculating. The match began. Derek charged with a high kick, fast, aggressive, but James sidestepped it with ease. Then came a spinning back fist. Blocked. A sweep? Avoided. The students began to murmur. Within 30 seconds, it was clear. James wasn't just defending. He was teaching. He never struck Derek. Instead, he flowed like water, neutralizing every attack with minimal movement and maximum control. Derek grew frustrated, flailing wildly. James gently trapped. His arms redirected him into the mat and pinned him effortlessly. The dojo fell silent. James helped Derek up and simply said, "That's enough." Then he returned to his mop. But Sarah couldn't stay silent. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few keys, and her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're him. You're Silent Storm." Gasps filled the room. James Walker had once been James Silent Storm Washington, a 5-time undefeated MMA world champion who vanished from the public eye years ago after retiring at the peak of his career. Sports journalists had speculated for years about his disappearance, burnout, injury, betrayal. None guessed he had quietly stepped away from fame to heal, reflect, and start over. Derek's face went pale. "You challenged a legend," one student muttered. "I didn't know," Derek mumbled. You didn't care to know," James interrupted quietly. "You assumed." The next day, news spread fast. The video went viral. A janitor outclassing a black belt in front of a live audience. But what stuck with people wasn't just the skill, it was the humility. James hadn't mocked Derek. He hadn't boasted. He had simply asked for respect and delivered a lesson no one would forget. Sarah approached James afterward. "Why are you here? You could be anywhere." James smiled. "Sometimes, the quietest places are where the real work begins. I'm not too interested in glory. I'm interested in helping people grow." She asked him to teach, really teach. Not flashy moves, but discipline, awareness, and humility. He agreed, under one condition: no egos, only effort. 3 months later, James led weekly sessions at Iron Fist Dojo. He redefined martial arts for tenorists. The students, not as a competition, but as a journey of character. Enrollment doubled. Parents came not just for trophies, but for transformation. He introduced meditation, ethics, and conflict resolution alongside sparring drills. And Derek, he stayed. He swallowed his pride, apologized in front of the entire class, and became a student again. This time, truly learning. The arrogant swagger faded. In its place grew respect. James never reclaimed the spotlight, but that was never his goal. In interviews that followed the viral video, he declined endorsements. He simply said, "I've fought in front of thousands, but the biggest victory? Walking into a room where no one expects anything from you and choosing to rise anyway." Iron Fist Dojo became a symbol of that philosophy. A banner was hung with James's words, "True strength is quiet. True victory is humble." Sarah went on to write her thesis on ego in martial arts. With James's mentorship as its backbone, her research became the foundation for a national youth program. Storm. Within dedicated to helping young people develop inner discipline through martial arts. And every Friday, James still mopped the floor before class. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. "Why do you still do that?" Sarah once asked. James shrugged. "Because it reminds me that we're all students, no matter how high we rise." It started as a cruel joke. A wealthy businessman named Richard Whitmore thought it would be amusing to invite the cleaning lady to his high society gala. Her name was Victoria Fields, a quiet black woman, her 42nd, who scrubbed his marble floors and polished his silverware. But tonight, she was supposed to be the punchline. He sent her an invitation, handwritten, official, looking, expecting her to decline or show up, confused. What he didn't expect was for her to show up dressed like royalty. When Victoria stepped into the ballroom that evening, heads turned. The same people who ignored her during the day now stared, stunned by her grace, posture, and presence. Her emerald gown shimmered under the chandeliers, but it wasn't just the dress, it was how she wore it, like she belonged. Richard, caught off guard, laughed nervously. "I see you got my invitation," he said smugly. "I did," Victoria replied with a polite smile. "Thank you for having me. It's long overdue," guests murmured. Whispers rippled through the room. Who was she really? Then came the moment no one expected. Victoria pulled a small box from her purse, placed it on the center table, and opened it. Inside, a gold ring engraved with the Whitmore family crest. A legal document followed. DNA, results, and a notarized confession from a dying attorney. "I am Victoria Whitmore," she said clearly, "daughter of Charles Whitmore, your father, and the rightful heir to 40% of this estate." Silence. People froze. Richard's smug grin evaporated. "This isn't just about inheritance," Victoria continued. "It's about the truth. For decades, your family erased my mother, your father's first love. Because she was black, he was forced to abandon us to protect his reputation. But he never stopped supporting us, privately." Gasps filled the room. "I came here tonight not for revenge, but to restore dignity, to my mother's name, and to Mina." The crowd was stunned. Journalists, business partners, even Richard's own wife looked at him with confusion and disbelief. But Victoria wasn't finished. "I've spent the past 2 years working undercover in this household, gathering evidence. What I found wasn't just family secrets. It was theft, embezzlement, contracts forged in your name to drain the company's assets. Tonight, that truth comes to light." She handed sealed documents to a nearby lawyer and nodded. Within minutes, police entered the room. Richard was handcuffed and read his rights. His wife, devastated, stepped away from him without a word. It was poetic. The man who tried to humiliate a woman he thought was beneath him had orchestrated his own downfall. And Victoria? She stood tall, her expression calm. Not victorious, but resolute. A month later, she was named chairwoman of Whitmore Holdings. But instead of revenge, she initiated reforms, transparency policies, employee equity programs, and scholarships in her mother's name. She launched the Fields Foundation, dedicated to restoring legacies lost to racism and injustice. Under her leadership, the company's stock soared, not just because of smart management, but because of public support for her mission. Meanwhile, Richard's trial revealed decades of corruption. He had siphoned millions from the Daisleys company and framed former employees to protect himself. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. During the sentencing, Victoria made no public statement. Only a single note handed to the judge. Justice is not revenge. It's restoration. 6 months later, the former cleaning lady was featured on the cover of major business magazines. Her story spread like wildfire, not a tale of humiliation turned glory, but of dignity reclaimed. When asked in an interview what gave her the strength to endure years of silence and invisibility, she replied, knowing who I am. Even when they didn't. Victoria hired dozens of employees from underserved communities, many of whom had been overlooked despite their talent. She started an internal training program for staff without degrees, promoted based on merit, not pedigree. The Whitmore estate, once a symbol of elitism, became the headquarters for innovation, diversity, and ethical business. One afternoon, as she walked through the marble halls she used to clean, Victoria paused by a framed portrait of her father, now restored beside a painting of her mother, both smiling. "I didn't come here to erase history," she told her assistant. "I came to write the part they tried to leave out." As for Richard, he watched the empire he once controlled rise higher than ever without him. And for the first time, he had to face the truth. The woman he tried to break was the one who rebuilt everything. They laughed when she showed up. At the grand estate of the Blackwood family, the guests were adorned in silk gowns and designer tuxedos. And in walked Victoria Fields, the black cleaning lady everyone assumed was there by mistake. But tonight was different. She wore a royal blue gown, her posture regal, her eyes calm. The room fell silent, not because of her entrance, but because of what followed. Victoria stepped forward and revealed what no one expected. She was Victoria Fields, Blackwood, the late patriarch's rightful daughter and heir. For 2 years, she had worked undercover, gathering evidence of Richard Blackwood's crimes, embezzlement, discrimination, and even the truth behind their father's untimely death. In front of the entire crowd, she presented legal documents, DNA proof, and testimonies. Richard was arrested that night, his lies crumbling. And Victoria? She didn't seek revenge. She rebuilt the company, turned it into a force for justice, and opened doors for people like her, who had been overlooked for too long. True power doesn't come from a title or money. It comes from dignity, courage, and knowing who you are. Victoria's story reminds us that the most underestimated person in the room might be the one carrying the truth that changes everything. If her strength moved you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever been underestimated? Tell us your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories that prove dignity always wins in the end.